Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and colleagues, welcome to this Night Owl session. It's an honor, but also a responsibility to moderate a panel with such distinguished guests. So allow me first to introduce who are tonight's panelists. Mrs. Asta Vrečko, Minister for Culture, Slovene government, art historian, started her political life as activist in the Workers' and Punks University. She was later a researcher at the Faculty of Arts in Ljubljana, where she also defended her PhD. She has curated important exhibitions like Ties That Bind, about the importance of Zagreb Academy for Slovene artists between the two world wars, or The Common in Community, the Slovene Pavilion at Venice Biennial in 2021. As a coordinator of the Left Party, she's one of the three leaders of current government coalition in Slovenia. Welcome. Mrs. Géraldine Schwarz, German-French journalist, born in Strasbourg, grew up in Paris, lives in Berlin. She works on issues of European identity, memory, and history, which she presents as central to the fight against the far right. Her latest book, Where We Come From, plunges us into Europe's history since antiquity in search of a common history which gives meaning to a European collective identity. Her previous book, Les Amnésiques, Those Who Forget, was an account of her French-German family history under and after the Third Reich, and a warning against our tendency to go with the flow, even the most criminal ones. Welcome, bienvenue. Mr. Margaritis Schinas, from Chalkidiki, studied first at Aristotle University in Thessaloniki, and then continued in Bruges, London School of Economics, and Harvard University School of Business. He was a member of the European Parliament between 2007 and 2009, chief spokesperson of the European Commission between 2014 and 2019, and vice president and European Commissioner for promoting European way of life in the first von der Leyen Commission between 2019 and 2024. In this capacity, you were overseeing the EU policies not only for migration, security union, and social rights, but also education, culture, youth, and dialogue with churches and religious associations. Welcome. And Mr. Ivan Krastev, currently a chairman of the Center for Liberal Strategies in Sofia and Albert Hirschman Permanent Fellow at the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna. In 2020, he was awarded the Jean-Marie Prize for European Essay Writing for his book, together with Stephen Holmes, The Light That Failed, A Reckoning. Although published in 2019 by Penguin, it features on the cover names of Orban, Putin, Trump, and Xi Jinping, and answers still very relevant question: why did the West, after winning the Cold War, lose its political balance? Mr. Krastev is a founding board member of the European Council of Foreign Relations, a member of the Global Advisory Board of Open Society Foundation in New York, and a member of the Advisory Council of European Cultural Foundation in Amsterdam. Dear guests, dear friends, I would not dare to present as a program director of European Capital of Culture, Nova Gorica-Gorizia, our case as a symptom of current cultural trends, but would simply like, as a kind of introduction to our debate, list a few challenges we were confronted with. And they may help us trigger the debate and maybe answer the title question: how can culture build resilience in a society of crisis? So what have we learned during this year and the previous year of preparation about the power of culture? First, we were working literally on the border of two worlds. Not only two cities, Nova Gorica and Gorizia, two countries, Slovenia and Italy, but literally two former worlds, West and East. But our slogan, Go Borderless, is not anymore a utopia. It is a vision that already creates tangible results. For example, our opera performance, piano concert, or even a film projection was mise en scène the way the stage was on one side of the border and the audience on the another side of the border. So we literally went across the border with different genres of arts and culture. Second, the strongest ties were built when people of communities were uniting their forces with very clear common goals and a very niche project. So an astronomic observatory, a traveling film projector, a walking path from cathedral to monastery, rather than another team-building retreat workshop. Third, the more personal, even intimate stories we had, the more universal message was reached. Whether it was theater director Tome Janežić remembering every year of his childhood in Nova Gorica with a monthly episode of his year-long dodecalogy, or a film director Gregor Božić who was searching for the taste of old apricot in the orchard inherited from his father, these stories created a relevant message about topic as collective memory, sustainable future, or intergenerational solidarity. In a way, that's what I learned from your book, when little stories can create a grande histoire. And that's why our fourth lesson is that we shall always fight for progressive against mainstream, for avant-garde against business as usual. Whether it was Pasolini's radicality in our region against everyday fascism, or Slovene avant-garde collective Oho, who was transforming a national symbol, the mountain of Triglav, into a three-man with a ladder and a black cloth installation. From both sides, we have learned that it is only by challenging the current norm that we have a chance for light not to fail, if I may paraphrase Professor Krastev's title. And finally, that is why we need strong historical figures as our allies, to stand on their shoulders to get out of the contemporary mud. Minister Vrečko was understanding, I say that it was so moving for us to see how few sketches brought from the concentration camp of Dachau by Zoran Mušić helped us feel and understand the atrocities of Holocaust, or how closing the asylums by Franco Basaglia in Gorizia and then Trieste changed our entire understanding of mental health issues today. So these are the historical figures on whose shoulders we were building our contemporary discourses. And to close, because of all these couples, intimate and universal, common and communities, progressive and historical, we were literally able to show a movie about the old railway from Adriatic Sea to the Alps, below the greatest stone arch bridge in the world, while the train was passing above, connecting the space and time in a real kind of magic. But also, with the same project, to remove railway tracks from the degraded outskirts of two cities on the border to create a space for university campus and a European platform for the interpretation of 20th century, which the abbreviation is EPIC, European Platform for Interpretation of Century. This is our key highlight project. This is our lesson for the resilience in the time of crisis. You need to move and also to remove some things in order to move people for progressive emancipatory moves. So allow me now to start with Minister Vrečko, and we'll do 3 rounds of questions, if you agree. We will try to go from more personal to more and more universal, and of course, at the end, we will be open for your questions, but also for interaction between you. So, Minister Vrečko, when an art historian sits together with her other European colleagues at the Council of Ministers, which topics makes your heart beat faster, in both senses of liking the subject or being very, very upset by them?
Much and yeah, okay. Thanks for the question, Stojan, and thank you for inviting me for this night session. I think that there is many interesting topics being put in front here in Bled Strategic Forum, and I am very grateful, not only as the minister, but also as a person working in culture, that every year there is a topic focused on culture, which is very important, of course, in diplomacy, in foreign affairs, but also it is a very important topic of different society of our countries and of today's world. So this, I think, is a very important notion. Also, that there is always somebody from the spectrum of culture, philosophers, that is being here put in focus, and I'm grateful that this is our session this year. So to answer or to sort of start a conversation. Well, we as Minister of Culture, of course, we always start with complaining how we have we don't have enough money and of budget cuts, because this is unfortunately it's sort of a joke, but it is sort of unfortunately also very true, because usually when crisis emerges in one country or in the European Union, the culture is the first to go. And then, unfortunately, other important sector of public affairs follows. And this is because culture is never seen as some hub of social change, or it is, and that's why it's not very likable. But on the other hand, it is not seen as something that is very important for the economics, for development, and so on. But of course, we all know that this is not true. Culture is one of the most important agents of change in the society, and it is, together with education, something that transfers society when crises, as we are speaking today, are happening. So what is also very triggering and important realization for me is that even though, of course, we are there all in more or less very tight community, because we all want to help our cultures, arts, our artists, and so on. It is the European values that connect us, and we are always speaking about European values. But unfortunately, what I have seen through this mandate, or even before, I think that the words are not understood the same in the same context anymore. So even though we are speaking the same words, we are talking about democracy, we are talking about peace, we are talking about European values and what connects us, we, unfortunately, when we come to the question of, I don't know, agendas, changes, and so on, it seems that we are not talking on the same subject, and I'm seeing a bit maybe that this is also what we need to speak about. So what are these words mean to all of us? What is what connects us?
Thank you, Minister. Géraldine, they say that the best way of patriotism is to be critical to your own nation or state. How does a writer confront this challenge when she or he has several homelands? In other words, if I ask you the title of your latest book, D'où nous venons? Where are we coming from?
Well, maybe the greatest advantage to have more than one nation is that it's a very good to protect yourself against nationalism. And for me, my home, so where I come from, is definitely Europe, and I devoted my last book to Europe. It avoids the choice between Germany and France, so for me it's very convenient. But for most people, Europe cannot and should not replace the deep attachment to the region where they grew up. Emotional attachment to landscapes, to language, to flavors, to rituals. That gives a very deep sense of security to many people, a sense of permanence in a very fast-changing world, and we should not mock this need that many people have. We should respect it. But on the other hand side, most people also need to strive to something bigger than themselves, to something bigger than their little regional horizon. And this is where Europe could come in, as a kind of second home, a home of choice, of shared values, of shared culture. But currently, Europe fails to do so. And one of the reasons is that citizens don't feel a shared sense of belonging in Europe. And you know, in democracies, decision makers can decide the best measures, the best cooperation on a military, on an economic level, on a political level. But if they don't have the citizens follow them, Europe will collapse, because citizens have a lot of power as voters, as consumers, as taxpayers, as users of new technologies. And citizens need to dream. And this is where it's a big mistake, as the minister just said, always to underestimate culture and this idea of identity. For a long time, we have avoided this subject, the very delicate subject of European roots, where we come from, to define a European identity, for fear of being too simplistic or of excluding communities. The problem is that we left things very vague, and people need a narrative to love Europe. You know, you cannot make people love Europe if you cannot define it in a way. Give a definition to the words, as the minister just said. And the second problem is that we left the field open for other narratives. Narratives from the far right, which definition is unfortunately very successful, but it is a quite nationalist definition. And so this is what I try to do with my book, is to give a kind of counter-narrative by tracing a common history and showing how over the centuries since ancient times our cultures have been shaped and intertwined. But who reads book today? So we need support to spread this narrative through social networks or podcasts.
We will come back to the question, who reads books, because you are the right people here to be asked this question. Margaritis, we were joking in the lobby about this night or midnight session, but there is, as you know, this famous Minerva's owl, or more precise, the little owl, Athena Noctua, that accompanied Athena, the virgin goddess of wisdom, who comes only when the day settles down and you can see the consequences. Are you already in a position, a good year after, to look back on your previous position of European Commissioner and reflect on your most European achievements in this mandate?
Thank you all. Thank you for having me. In my many Brussels years, I always try to come to Bled. I never received an invitation. In the first year that I'm no longer commissioner, an invitation comes. So let me start by denouncing the Secretary General here present, who, to add insult to injury, is called Grek, which means Greek in Slovenian. Okay, on a more serious note, I'm delighted to be here because also to link it with the Minerva and the Athena Nocturna. This bird is known, it was always the bird of wisdom, of science, and of patience. And we are in desperate need of all three commodities in today's world. So looking back, to come to your question, when Ursula called me 5 years ago to give me my new job, she told me more or less something like, I don't want you to do money, tariffs, containers. I want you to be the most anthropocentric member of the college. So I want you to steer and coordinate all policies that pertain to people. And I think what she had in mind was the famous Macron speech in Sorbonne, where he called for l'Europe qui protège, borders, security, migration, and health. And he also called for a Europe of empowerment and opportunities, which is people, education, culture, sport, mobility, Erasmus. So Ursula had this idea, a good one, I think, to cluster all this under one vice presidency and call it, that was not such a brilliant idea, but the name, as Tanya would remember, created lots of friction in Parliament, call it protecting the European way of life. And 2019 was the last year of Trump 1, so many viewed, especially on the left side of Parliament, that this was the European equivalent of make Europe great again, crush everybody who is not like us, and so on and so forth. So looking back, I think it became very obvious that people would come into Europe from a positive perspective, not only because of the values of who we are and what, but from their expectation of Europe to make their lives better. So I'm not a believer in a homo europaeus. I do not think that identity is what should drive us. I think, and in hindsight after these 5 years, I think it's solutions that make Europeans believe into the project. Let me give you one example, actually two. Pandemic management, COVID-19. Do you think that Europe would have been the same had it not been for this biggest vaccination program in the history of medicine that we designed and implemented? People would have said that if Europe is incapable of helping us manage such a transborder global health, so why is Europe good at it? Another example, migration. For years and years, we tried to find a European solution, and we consistently have been failing. So the extreme right would say, what is Europe good for if they are not able to find a solution on borders, on migration, on asylum? So that answers your question. I feel very proud. I don't know what the future holds for me, but no one would ever take away from me the pride that on these two very anthropocentric files, migration, asylum, and pandemic management, Europe delivered. And okay, people will not come out in the streets partying because Europe delivered, but deep down they know. Deep down they know, and this is what brings us together. This expectation of Europe as a problem solver, as a deliverer of good. If this works, the rest will follow. If this doesn't work, no chance for the rest to fill this void.
Thank you, Margaritis. Even we still stay in the zone of the wisdom comes at the end, when the night falls. How does current Europe look to a liberal strategist who recently stated in one Arte interview that both left and right are afraid of the future, but for different reasons? That left mostly because of the climate catastrophe and right because of population extinction. How does current Europe look to you?
It's not only a European problem. There is an apocalyptic vibe which you're going to see it, and it's really different on the left and on the right. We live as if we are the last man, and not in the Fukuyama sense. So from this point of view, you have a very strong, particularly with the younger generation, saying, listen, if we're not going to change our way of life, they're not going to be life, so you believe that you're the last human. And then you have basically, because of a depopulation, because of migration, because of culture, and we're going to do it, it's, am I not the last Bulgarian? Who is going to speak Bulgarian language in 100 years? And this demographic anxiety is particularly strong on the right. And in a certain way, the story of we're losing it is, in my view, very big, because future is one of the invisible institutions which are critically important for any political project. A certain understanding of the future. For example, in democracy, this is, we can solve certain problems today, but certain problems we can postpone for tomorrow. If you believe that tomorrow is too late, it changed everything in politics. If I do believe that if nothing is going to be solved today, tomorrow it does not make sense, I'm going to behave very differently. And we're seeing this type of a polarization. And secondly, I very much agree with the fact it's not simply about identity. People have the feeling that they don't know anymore. They don't have sense of home. Home is a place where you understand and where you feel you understood. And as a result of it, in my view, part of the anxiety that you see is that you have this total disorientation. For example, we are living, really for very good reasons, with a lot of people who are not coming basically from the same cultural background. So as a result of it, you should explain all the time what you have in mind, because you cannot be sure that you're going to be properly understood. As East European, from a particular generation, so a particular sense of humor, I have a good reasons to have noticed this. But I'm saying this because paradoxically culture, and we're talking about culture, is this feeling that basically people are getting you right. That you have this easiness. It's not by accident. Isaiah Berlin said that feeling free and feeling at home in English are synonymous. Because at home you feel relaxed, you basically don't have the feeling that you could be misunderstood. And I do believe this is a problem of the modern life. It's not the problem of Europe. I don't believe it's wrong, but this is changing it very much. And because it is changing it, you have on one level this total overreaction. If you look at the voters of the far right, listen, some of them are migrants, but they don't want to migrate in space, but in time. You want to go back to a different time because this is the place. They go for different type of demographic nature of society, basically different ethnic composition and so on. And this migration is not going to work, obviously. But I'm saying this because talking about Europe, the problem is how to create this sense of being at home. And it's not easy. And by the way, it's not easy, and I'm going to finish on this because culture was very much created as an instrument to deal with our mortality. And now you have this strange story, which on one side, in Silicon Valley, you have these people who very seriously believe that they're going to live forever. Woody Allen, by the way, had this famous saying. He said, I want to live forever, but not in the hearts of the people, but in my apartment in Manhattan. And this story that people really start to behave as if they're going to live forever. I don't know, do you read all these texts about some of these billionaires who basically really treating themselves and doing things which are interesting to follow. But this is with the idea that you're living forever. If you're living forever, this is totally changing the idea of culture. Because culture is the way you're dealing with your mortality. Nation is the way you're dealing with your mortality. You believe that I'm going to die, but for example, my kids are going to remember me, or I'm going to die, but I'm going to write such a great book that people are going to read it in angry tears. Suddenly, individual starts to look immortal, but culture starts to look mortal. You're saying who is reading books, for example. It's not possible anymore to be a national poet. By the way, it's much easier to be translated in 20 languages, but it is very difficult to have a cultural figure which is going to shape in the way it was shaping before. Simply this was, and I'm not saying that this is bad. I simply say it's different. And I do believe this is changing the feeling of what it means, what culture is for whom, how. For example, before, if you met a French person, and if you don't know anything, you should believe that if you're going to mention Victor Hugo, you're there. They'll know something, and basically you have these references to a high national culture that is understandable to everybody. And you have the same for other nations. Listen, I'm not sure that for many people in the young generation this is true anymore. They're socialized in a different culture. It does not mean that they're not reading more or they're not consuming culture, but it is totally different. And as a result of it, I agree, it's not about creating European identity. By the way, people have it, people move. People see Europe as something that they're part of. There's very small nations. The claustrophobia of a small nations is something that we know about. But on the other side, if this sense of home is not going to be there, I do believe that they're going to be a major issue. Then basically people are starting freaking out. They have the feeling that they don't know who they are.
Thank you, Ivan. I have 2 short intermezzos for cutting the first round. First, you are laughing much more than at the previous session about Cosmos, which is a good thing. Maybe it has to do with the midnight. And the second is that with 5 people, there is at least, I didn't insist this in the beginning, that there is at least 10 cities sitting in front of you, from Sofia to Thessaloniki, from Madrid to Vienna, from Paris and Berlin to Ljubljana, Gorizia, Nova Gorizia. So this, I think, also illustrates what you were saying, that the place is, the second home is here, but the first home is not really sure where it is. Yeah. So to go to the round 2, Géraldine, une courte citation française, c'est de Les Amnésiques. Je veux comprendre ce qui était pour savoir ce qui est. Rendre à l'Europe ses racines que les amnésiques tentent de lui arracher. She wanted to understand what was in order to know what is, to give back to Europe the roots that those who forget try to grab away. So how culture, in your opinion, is at the heart of this current cultural war, in fact, because you are saying in our correspondence that there is the entire strategy of manipulation and history and even censorship of arts, of museums, to impose a new narrative, a new value system, and you are using the word of cultural war. So which are the sides in this war and what are the arms to fight it?
I'm happy we laughed before because what I'm going to say is not very funny. But maybe it's also a good reaction to has been said about the lack of European values. Because if there wouldn't be anything such as European values or European identity, why would the far right mobilize so much energy to win the war for cultural hegemony? For me, this is a proof enough. Culture is at the heart of a strategy led by the far right, which not only me, but is presently called Kulturkampf, cultural battle. And the aim is to win this cultural hegemony through historical revisionism, censorship, fake news, and anti-intellectualism. One of them is very powerful and is very interesting for my work. It's the way to manipulate collective memory through changing, inventing, transforming historical facts, but also names, like the Gulf of Mexico, to serve a purpose which is either imperialistic purpose, to justify an imperialistic aggression, like in the case of Putin, but above all, to try to change the historical narrative. Because who controls the past controls the present. So changing the historical narrative means changing our identities, or what is perceived like the present identity. One of the other tools is censorship, censoring, I mean, you've all followed this in the United States, knowledge, sciences, universities, arts, museums, words are banned, words are changed, the meaning, for example, of freedom. And these are all methods which are actually not new and existed 1 century ago. What is maybe new is how powerful the communication networks are. But the question is why actually this cultural war? What is the objective behind it? And it is to maybe, to confuse us, to make us lose the feeling of home, as you said, to make us feel our moral compass, our cultural compass, to destroy our set of values, because I do believe we have a set of values, to impose a new order, which I would summarize as the law of the strongest, of the most amoral, of the most violent. And the other question, which is even more depressing but interesting, is why do so many people subscribe to such a horrible vision, you know? And I think what we underestimate is that the leaders of this cultural battle have a very good knowledge of human nature. And they strive precisely where we are all of us, very vulnerable. They feed our desire for superiority. And, there are many forms of superiority to which one can cling: men over women, rich over middle class over poor, natives over migrants, citizens of a nation over the rest of the world. And unfortunately, this is very seducing because it allows to enjoy inequality. And this is very dangerous because it destroys the very foundation of our democratic communities, which is the belief that everybody should have equal rights in front of politics and in front of the law.
Thank you. Margaritis, there were mentioning of war, of lack of money, so I need to ask you, in trying to understand European way of life, culture is both in the beginning, literally in the beginning, from Greek tragedy, philosophy, to the end, to the cultural consumerism and this instrumentalization of culture through cultural tourism. I still want to understand, inside the mechanism of European Commission, where was culture and art structurally and financially positioned in order to fight the battles that were mentioned today. So where in which portfolio these tools can be found?
If in my first round I tried to project the importance of good policy, in this round I think we need to go into the other sphere, which is the necessary emergence of, how should I call it, let's call it a European public space. Some people call it European public opinion. For this, we need many things. Culture is one, but not the only one. There is this famous sentence by singer Bono of the U2. It's a sentence that I would have liked to have said before him, but he said it before me. He said, Europe is a thought that needs to become a feeling. And he's so right, because we think Europe, we act Europe, we reflect on Europe, but we lack this emotional, sentimental element that gives added value to our national identity, because let us not fool ourselves. When we go home every night, we mainly switch to our national news ecosystem. Very few people, only gyms and airports follow Euronews. So to create this European public space, to create this feeling of emotions, we need to try to mobilize everything we have in our disposal, in our pockets. Culture is systematically, the ministers, I've been to countless councils of ministers, there is a generalized sense of moaning and complaining there is not enough money. True. But this argument ignores the fact that on Erasmus, we switched from 9 billion to 27 billion euros. We tripled the money for Erasmus. And in the next MFF, the figure will be 40 billion. So we're going into a situation where Erasmus will not be an option, would be somewhat an obligation, that's how we create public opinion. We need more trans-European transborder major events that brings us together. We only have 2 per year now. The Eurovision Song Contest and the Champions League's final. These are the 2 nights.
The European Capital of Culture.
And the European Capital.
Okay, very important.
These are the few nights where we act European, we feel European, but we need many more. That's why, some of you may remember, I made a public call to Taylor Swift before the European elections. Taylor Swift, with a post on Instagram in the United States on the need for young Americans to go and vote, she created 200,000 registrations to vote by young Americans in a week. And she was coming to Europe, and she was starting her world tour in Europe on the 9th of May, Europe Day, by the way, in Paris. So there could be no better moment for her to say something on Europe. Not that she likes Europe, go vote, you know. That would have done the deal. Full disclosure, I tried as much as I could. I tried publicly, I tried privately, I mobilized all my friends in the music industry. Nada. Nada. So I created more sense of emotions by calling her than I would expect it. But this shows that there is a market out there. There is a market that brings together culture, awareness, sentiments, feelings, transborder events. Sometimes some people would say a common enemy. We're having many of those. That also helps. And I give you a few examples from my time as European Commission Chief Spokesman. When I was the Chief Spokesman on the Juncker Commission, all the commissioners wanted to present their initiatives in the Commission press room, which is a big, grey, dull room in Brussels. I always pushed them to go and present them on the ground. They all wanted the Brussels limelight. I convinced my compatriot Avramopoulos to launch Frontex, the new Frontex, in Capitan Andreevo, the border between Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey. It was a big success because we had the dogs, we had the border, we had the guards. But some of these efforts to create sentimental or emotional elements are lost also because this Brusselsized mentality Brusselizes everything at the expense of. And the final element, we need not narratives, we need stories for that. And we need also help from national politics, from national politicians to do that. I will never forget the emotion that we created in Brussels when we found the oldest Erasmus student. He was 82, a Spanish abuelo of 82 years old from Valencia who was studying in Milan. Only the fact that we brought him to light created an emotional reflex. So we need stories, we need money, we need help, we need to de-Brusselize, we need feeling, and we need some help also from national politics and the European personae, if you like, that can help us.
So, Margaritis, after being invited to Bled for the first time, you need to come to Gorica and Gorica because you need to know that on the square where the Prime Minister then and the President of European Commission were counting down 10-0 for the entrance of Slovenia, it is now called the Europe Square.
Bravo.
And there is no border there, literally no border. Yes, and it's called still Piazza Transalpina from the Italian side. Thank you, Minister. Yeah. Ivan, wars. You were recently quite explicit that the current war in Ukraine is not only about the land, but mostly about people. More even about demography than democracy. So how can we, in this sense, and I know how well you know the Balkan also, history and situation, how can we avoid the use or the abuse of culture in building up nationalistic discourse and reach rather the universal message of humanity and solidarity? I have in mind a very particular Slavoj Žižek's brutal claim that we should always search for a poet behind the genocide.
There is something particular about the wars that we are seeing, and because war is war, people are dying. I'm not talking on this level. But if you try to understand the war in its specificity, you should try to understand what shocks you more, what you find most difficult to understand. And in the case of the Russian-Ukrainian war, this is the abduction of kids. Listen, it normally goes the other way. You're expelling people, and you're seeing this, and we know from the Yugoslav wars and others. So where is the problem with the abduction of kids? What it tells you about why, and we're talking about tens of thousands. I have spent quite a lot of time traveling to Russia. I have seen President Putin several times. And what people should try to understand is that one of the things that we cannot know how to think about, and this is particularly true for the left and the liberals, this is about the demographic fears. Listen, for Russia, 1990s was not an easy time. And people who have not been there probably are not going to understand why basically they're allowed to be hijacked in the way they have been hijacked. Russia lost around 1/3 of its GDP for several years. If you're coming from Mars, it looks like exactly like a country that lost a war. The demographics went so bad that the longevity of a Russian man was 64 years in the 1990s. This was on the level of some of the poor African countries. By the way, Russia is a country where the longevity, the life expectancy between men and women is the biggest gap in the world. The women are living 10 or 12 years more than men. And I'm saying all this because from his first day in power, President Putin get obsessed with reversing the decline of the Russian population. A lot of money have been put in this. I mean, we're talking about real money for a certain period. They had the feeling that they're stabilizing this and that. But one of the most important things that we have learned in the world is that to have kids or not have kids is a personal decision of people. You can try with economic policies, you can do this or that, but for the moment, there is not a single country which for a long period of time has reversed the trend of demographic decline. It's not only about money, it's about cultural changes, it's about many things. Why I'm saying this? Because suddenly, President Putin developed this kind of a story that they want us not to have babies. Do you know which was the first openly anti-Western legislation being voted in Russia? It was before the war. This was the famous Dima Yakovlev law, which banned Americans for adopting Russian orphans. And listen, Russia has a lot of orphans, very badly taken care of. And of course, this concrete case was a tragic for a Russian kid who died. But this story about our kids, they're taking our kids. And this created an atmosphere in which, by the way, COVID was very bad for Russia. It was also very specific, in my view, for President Putin, who was very isolated for reasons that I don't know. But then you're also facing your own mortality. And this is changing your time projections. But in the year 2021, on 5 different occasions, without being asked, President Putin, by the way, 3 times talking in front of the school students, repeated one and the same thing. He said, in the end of the 19th century, great Russian scientist Dmitry Mendeleev predicted that in year 2000, there are going to be 500 million Russians in the world. And now there are only 143, and particularly if you go with the UN projections, the worst of projections is that in the year 2100, there are going to be 74 million Russians. Back then, there are going to be 10 times more Nigerians than Russians. You try to imagine the territory of the country. And then the story is, we go for people. It's not about territory. By the way, Russia is quite a big place, probably. You have seen on the map, but it's about people. And this is why taking these kids, a certain legislation was done on the first months of the war for fast adoption of these kids in the families. This is a very strange thing, but this tries to understand you, the nature of the war. And there was in the 17th century in America, with Native American tribes, something that was called by historians the Morning Wars. when you start basically losing people and you're starting a war to hijacking women or kids because you have the feeling that basically otherwise you cannot guarantee the survival of your tribe. I'm saying this because this kind of a competition for people is going to be very central. Listen, there are parts in the world where they're not going to be a change. In a 10 or 15 years, we're going to see such a demographic changes that I'm going to give you just one figure and you're going to be really shocked if you don't know it. In a very rich place like the South Korea, there are 0.7 children per woman. In order to have a normal reproduction in the absence of migration, this is 2.1. South Korea, for many reasons, is a quite closed country. They didn't open for migration. As a result of it, if they're not going to be changed, either if they're not going to open for migration, or if they're not going basically to change their basically demographic profile, in a period of 20 years, they're going to lose 50% of its population. Listen, 20 years. And then imagine the structure of the population. How old, how young, how this is affecting the economy. By the way, already we are calculating that the South Korean army in the next 10 years is going to lose 20% of the recruits. You're going to lose people. I'm saying this because demographic imagination, by the way, we don't know what's going to happen in demography. Life is much richer than basically the demographic projections. But future stopped to be project. Future became projections. You have all these projections which are telling you how many people, how old they're going to be, what kind of economic expectations you have. And in my view, we're never going to understand the war if we're not going to know this particularly demographic anxiety on the side of the Russian government and particularly the president, and secondly, his own age. Because the other story about the world, which is quite obvious, but we're not talking enough, we're governed by a very old people. All over the major powers in the world, we're talking about very old people. This is true for the United States. This is true for Russia. This is true for China. This is true for India. This is true for Lula. All these people are very different in their politics. They're different in their backgrounds. But keep in mind, this is changing your time frame. You're seeing in a different way the time. And I do believe that as a result of it, and this is also my last point, also what is happening particularly in Europe, young people are minority. They're small cohorts. They don't have the numbers. By the way, this is one of the reasons they don't like democracy so much. People don't like games in which they cannot win. And in a certain way, for example, in places like Bulgaria, you have such a small cohort of young people, also because of migration and other things, that you never can use, basically, the ballot box to promote your agenda. This is why it's much easier to see young people on the streets protesting than in front of the ballot boxes. And I do believe that this generational dynamics is also going to be critical. And this is one of the things that we really should take care about. And this is why, to understand the nature of the modern wars, by the way, the same Israel-Palestine and so on. This is the paradoxical story that in both conflicts, one is very small as a territory, the other very big. By the way, Ukraine is a very big country. This is the other thing which is difficult for the Europeans of our small countries to understand when we talk about territory. And then you have this story that everything is changing, we need people, this is our people, we're going to get them. And I do believe this is really, really kind of a critically important, and this is why, in my view, demography is one thing that we should try to understand how to think about, not to go with the projections. Try to understand, by the way, also what it means to be old and what it means to be young in the world in which we are living. And as you know, the famous saying is that 60 is the new 40. But the other story, and this is about the old sessions, is that 10 p.m. is the new 12 p.m. So.
Yeah, this is a very site-specific remark. By the way, I realized that I have, on my left, I have authors, and on my right, I have institutions. So I would like to turn now this perspective into your perspective and ask Minister Vrečko, maybe this war, culture war, is also the way to get some of the money for the defense, for dual use of culture. But in fact, to be serious, this would be the right moment to ask you, as the minister who is also the coordinator of the party of the left, through which structural measures and legal mechanism a cultural sector can help develop solidarity in society. We were talking about the dangers of Kulturkampf, we were talking about the dangers of nationalistic discourse, but where can culture really breed this solidarity in society, especially in time of crisis like ours?
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, to follow up on my previous speaker, not only that these people are people, they're also all men. And this is the problem also with the politics that you were mentioning, or also you, because the problem is that when you do not have a strong social state, if you have very much differences in culture politics, social politics, and so on, inside of European Union, then it cannot develop as one. And for example, speaking of demographic measures, for example, in Slovenia, we just 2 years ago already, we've passed the law that now there is 14 months of paid maternity leave if both parents are taking it. In neighboring Italy, it's only 3 months. Same as France and same as many other countries. And speaking of today, there is a very huge group of women in Brussels. It started with a small group of Institute of 8th of March with the leader of Nika Kovac, and today they passed the initiative to the European Union with 1 million signatures, 1 million signatures to have abortion available for women across European Union, because many thousands of millions are still not getting free abortion or abortion that is allowed in some countries. So will the European Union listen or not? This is the question. And this is the question of human rights, this is a question of cultural rights, and this is also the question of social rights. And it starts there. And it starts with solidarity. Even if somebody doesn't need it, there has to be a way to get it. And also the same is with culture, with, which is mostly intertwined with multilateralism, with, of course, collaboration across borders, across nation. And Slovenia, for example, is one of the countries that is the most successful at European calls for culture, all of them, as a country, as a percentage of money that goes into Slovenia, for example. Not only NGOs, but also public institutions. And this is very important because all these consortiums and all of these networks that are established with that, they follow up. These are for now 20 years, many authors, workers, institutions, many young people that are getting older and becoming professionals, top of the field, and so on. And these networks never fail, this connection, and this is the connections that you were also talking about, but it cannot be forced. Culture and can never be instrumentalized as a tool of promoting some sort of values, ideas, or something to go forward, especially if we don't know what we are all going forward to. And this cultural Kulturkampf is, of course, something that is ages old, and I really hate to say that, and I hate the phrase, and I try to avoid it for 20 years, that we are living in the new 30s, because this was my topic, the 30s, and but I think that all these positives, everything is looking now that, yeah, we are living in some sort of resemblance of the times that we have already lived as Europe, as different nations. It's, of course, something very different, but of course there are many philosophical sayings also about that, how history repeats itself. So I think that what the core politics should be is making space for people to connect, to talk, to make projects that are maybe not, profitable, not, being something of dual use, but projects that can think some utopias, that can think societies in a different manner. And of course, culture here is, and art is something that can be useful, that we can look and learn from it, like from books, but not to use it or not to make it something as being used. And of course, money, unfortunately, is quite important here, especially in a way of, traveling and connecting between countries. And for Slovenia, for example, being a country that is very much connected with the Western Balkans, all these initiatives, all these networks, all this, everything money-wise that comes from Europe for science, for education or culture is important because it connects us not only with the European Union, but with the countries that are trying to get to the European Union, and to the countries that will become part of our space. And I think this is also very much important for these developing funds, but also to listen to countries. What do they need? What do they need now? Not just some agendas that, Brussels is writing, agenda, whatever they need to follow, but maybe to be a bit more creative, to listen to the people, to listen to the countries, to listen to the authors, the workers, and of course, one of the key importance of our topic, which is also connected with the ministerial in Brussels now, I see it in every country of European Union, of course, and also for us is super important, and we are working on it very closely, is the working conditions of artists and autonomy of media, because this is also part of our portfolio. Thank you.
Thank you, Asta. Margaritis, we mentioned Thessaloniki. It was the European capital of culture. The initiative was born in Athens. And my question is, will Greek society ever forgive Europe that we let you down during your toughest financial crisis? How resilient is contemporary Greek culture today?
Let me tell you that the Greeks will never forget those who brought the country to the brink of the abyss. And this was not Europe. The austerity program was the consequence, not the root of the disaster. The root of the disaster was that a political class created an incredible amount of debt. 340 billion euros of debt. This is the world record of debt. And a small country of 10 million managed to break it. So Greeks are very angry with those who were at the origin of this. When we were cut off the markets, as it always happens with the families, you turn around, no one shows up, only the family. And that's what happened. But the family requested that we sort of reform and do things differently, and we do not accumulate debt. We do things a different way. And you know what? It worked. Greece now is one of the fastest growing Eurozone economies. We managed to have 50% the level of unemployment. We are a small European tiger now. And part of the positive brand that Greece represents, very often, when I fly to Thessaloniki, unfortunately not many direct flights, I always fly via Munich, via Frankfurt. There is always someone who's telling me, where are you going? And I say, Greece. And they all say, lucky one. This is the proof that we made it, because the branding of the country is now attractive. We had 35 million tourists coming this summer. It's an organized country, it's a smiling country, hospitable country. So, yeah, we will never forget those who try to derail the country, and we will be always enormously grateful to those who saved us from the abyss.
Thank you. Minister, you were involved with the Slovene Pavilion at Venice Biennial a few years ago, and you were one of the most loyal supporters of our biennial of Young Artists of Europe of Mediterranean this year at Go25. In a way, it relates to Erasmus mentioned before, because I wanted to ask you how important it is to be able to measure young artists' work with contemporary colleagues in Europe and in the world, and not being limited only to the shores of our own sea. Is there a possible cultural Erasmus?
Of course. Well, this is already happening because many countries and institutions and foundations, municipalities across Europe have residencies, and this is something very, very important, to have time to go from your environment, working environment, social environment, to some other for a month, 2 or 3, just to work, to reflect, and to have time to think, and of course meet other people, because culture is, the field of culture is really not limited to national borders. Also, the people are not living, they are, I don't know, Slovenian artists or German artists, but not living in their own state. Slovenian artists that are living here, that are our artists, are maybe not born Slovenian. We have, of course, all the people living near the border. We have other cultures like Roma and so on, and minorities, and this is important in culture. This is really the core. So every country, in this sense, is like European Union, because every country has this. This is not something very specific for Slovenia, and this is something that we really also tried to show at the Frankfurt Book Fair 2 years ago. Because we were the guest of honor, but Slovenian-speaking people are only 2 million in the whole world, and before us it was Spain, which has a bit of more people who understand or speak Spain, even though focus was Spanish literature, of course, but still we did manage sort of to break through that, and the idea is, again, like the European Capital of Culture, that culture is a mediator, because different artists, different culture workers, writers, they understand each other, even though they don't speak the same language. They're speaking the language of culture and of art. And this is why this is universal. Even theater, which is maybe theater is like a living art, is maybe the most connected with the national language, but still it's super universal, even if you don't understand the language. And so we find ourselves in culture. I think that we feel that we are all Europeans. We do, and when we get together, no matter in Venice Biennial or in any other manifestation, we feel that we do belong to European culture space, because we have our common identity. We have our Greek culture, we have our common history, our common fails. Every country has it. So, and also our common struggles when our artists or journalists become too loud, and where something is happening in the country and there is something not the most democratic regime, they're the first on the front. So I think this is important to see that this maybe it is a bit different, and of course what do people need is public space, and this is very important for culture, to have public space to speak and to create.
Thank you. Ivan, I have deliberately avoided throughout the whole debate a lot of questions about identity. It's my own personal problem, but still with you I'm willing to risk a little bit. Can all this criticism of current weaknesses of European politics or politicians paradoxically create certain resistance or even renaissance of European identity as critical, progressive, emancipatory? Or shall we already ask more pessimistic question, like the title of your last book, After Europe?
One question that I really hate, and this is about pessimism and optimism. And for a very simple reason, both pessimists and optimists assume that they know how the future is going to look like. And I never had this feeling that I know how the future is going to look like, slightly beyond this divide. But where you're totally right is, nothing makes people more interested in others than crisis. You have the Greek crisis, and then suddenly the ordinary German became a specialist on the Greek pension system. And then you have basically the migration crisis, and every Hungarian became a specialist on the German asylum system. I'm saying this because through crisis you're trying to understand others and to understand them as different, and in a certain way crises are more interesting basically than successes for people. You're starting better to understand what is going on, and from this point of view Europe is in a way much more integrated. Politically, economically, it's not simply that people are moving. But there's three things that are important for me. I was always trying to see what's going on, also from the point of view of what you learn from your personal biography. Listen, I was a kind of 25-year-old when the Berlin Wall fell. And now looking back, I'm sure that better be in a closed society that is opening than in an open society that is closing. You cannot imagine how much energy was coming, and Bulgaria was a very provincial place, very close place, very different than you know, for example, in former Yugoslavia. By the way, one of the most dramatic sense of change I have seen in my life in 1990, which was my first trip to the West, was crossing Bulgarian-Serbian border and went through Belgrade to Dubrovnik. This was like moving from the black and white movie to the color movie. And of course it was before the real war started. It was because of many things, but when you go to Paris and London, you're not so much shocked after this because you have seen all this on films. And you're not comparing Sofia with Paris. But then I remember what was the strong sense of everything, how the bookstores look like, the jazz clubs and this. And I'm saying this because for our kids this is not there anymore. For example, my daughter does not have a sense of crossing the border. For me it was years, and I have been traveling quite a lot, years, crossing by train or crossing by car, there was some kind of something emotional happening. It took me really years in order to normalize these crossing borders. There is a generation simply that does not know that borders in Europe exist. At the same time, and this is to answer your question, I was sent in Sofia now and I was back, and we started to talk about a project, the State of Society. We decided how to make sense of what's going on in Bulgaria, and we decided to go with several small projects. And I'm going to tell you, because in my view this is based on these small things that you don't understand, and this is why you want to understand better what they mean. For example, in the last 2 or 3 years, we have a major decline of the number of Bulgarian graduates from our elite gymnasiums studying abroad. Before basically going to study abroad was kind of a social mobility. It was prestige. If you have been graduating one of these prestigious schools, and they're mathematical schools or language schools, and not going to study abroad, the question is why? Is this and that? And then suddenly people start to talk and saying, oh, but here I have my friends, and I have this and that, and so on. Is this positive or negative? By the way, I do believe in a certain way it's positive, because the very fact that you're changing a place is not a guarantee that you're kind of doing something with your life. The second interesting thing, which probably is less positive, is how diaspora votes on elections. Listen, there was a time where in Eastern Europe, basically, people who were living in other parts of Europe used to vote very strongly for pro-European liberal parties, and we can see now a change in most of the countries. A lot of the vote goes for the nationalist parties, for protest parties. And then the question is why? Is this the same people? Or those that have been voting before are so much integrated in their host societies that they are basically much more voting on the Greek elections than in the Bulgarian one if they live in Greece? Is this the result of the new nationalist sentiment in some of the countries? But all this is an interesting question. By the way, what is happening? I don't know how it's here, but in Bulgaria the other major problem is gambling.
Gambling?
Gambling. It's incredible because of the easiness, because of online and so on. But you cannot imagine how much this is changing. So for us, it's very important to see to what extent this kind of a gambling is also the rise of this zero-sum culture. You start to believe in a miracle. You're going to make the money immediately. You're going to make them easily. And this is what I want to end up. One of the charm of Europe, but one of the risks of Europe is that everything is so easy. Listen, I'm always using this about migration. We are talking about crossing borders. The verb crossing comes from cross. It's difficult. It's not simple. Being on the cross is not fun. So from this point of view, when you make things very easy, and also when you make things very easy reversible. For example, I do believe that there is a whole generation totally shaped by a so-called change your mind policy of a big shops where you buy a dress, go back home, you don't like it anymore, and you can return. Listen, the idea that everything is reversible, that no decision is final, this is changing dramatically how you see the world. And I do believe that this easiness, which is part of the attraction of Europe, is also part of vulnerability. Because there are certain choices which are not easy. And we're making this, and we're seeing this, and we know basically that there are going to be a moment in which it's not so easy. And this is why I agree with you. I don't know. Listen, and that's really my last point. We always ask, is this good, is this bad? I do believe part of the story of the world in which we are living is that the best and the worst is the same thing. During the migration crisis, when you ask basically Bulgarians, what is the best thing that happened to you after the change they're going to be opening of the borders? If you're going to tell them what you're much more threatened by, it's opening of the borders. You like opening of the borders when you are crossing them. You don't like when others are doing it. But it's very important to keep in mind that the best and the worst is the same thing, and this is the world in which we are living.
Thank you. Ivan brought us to Berlin with this feeling, and I wanted to finish with Berlin, and this is the last question of the last round to you. It's a little bit longer as a kind of my respect to this, your personal, intimate honesty in your work that make me think of the essence of art, as I've once heard Claudio Magris put it, as discovering the darkest moments and not being afraid of bringing them to the surface and thus turning them into universal experience and legacy. But with some of you here in the theater, I see Branko Soban, here we were listening to Mr. Magris recently in Gorizia with a very dark message by himself. He said that with generations who need to Google to know who Stalin was, there is no hope that you can teach anything. So this was the reason he left his lecture in the United States, in Bard College, where Hannah Arendt is buried. And my last question to you is, do we still have audience for our lectures? Do we still have readers for our books?
Well, it depends what the books are about. Of course, my observation is quite similar to this of Mr. Magris, that while the memory of the traumas, of the shared traumas of the 20th century, Stalin or Hitler, were really major for my parents' generation, my father's generation, I speak about in my first book, and my generation, really major to anchor democratic values. Today, it's educational and it's binding force is very much reduced. Because for young generation, this past is increasingly distant. So they cannot identify with this past. So I think Mr. Margaritis is a bit severe. Why should they also, identify with this past? And I also observe a tiredness among older generation regarding ce passé qui ne passe jamais. So I think maybe it's important to rethink the way we try to deal with the memory of this past of the 20th century, maybe in a more pragmatic way, and try to avoid to pass on messages, moralizing messages, marked by shame, by guilt, by fear, because it's very counterproductive. And maybe to try to make people understand why this past can be useful for them in the present, by focusing on, I've mentioned it before, by focusing on first on the way totalitarian systems managed to seduce and to trap tens of millions of people. And these techniques which were used, or the message we were conveyed, a message of dream, because also National Socialism made German dream. It's not only about oppression, it's also very much about dream. So to focus on this, on this, and on the other hand side, also to focus on how socio-psychological mechanism, which I describe in my book, manage to change an individual or change a whole society, and to lead them to become complicit in a criminal regime. And these mechanisms are indifference, opportunism, conformism. And they are very important to me because they threaten, they are at work. They are at work in the United States of America, they are at work in Europe, and they threaten everybody, even those who believe to be immune. But even if we have to rethink this memory, it doesn't change the main problem, which is, I think, that it has been mentioned, that there is not a good story, a good European story. I call it narrative. Because the narrative, the current narrative of Europe being torn by the wars and reconciled around the idea of never again, is too narrow and doesn't touch the young people. So we need a more inspiring, also a more positive narrative. And we can, Europe is not only a reaction to the violence of the 20th century. It's not only a prevention measure against the repetition of these violences. It's much more. And so I think it's all about the story, because it's the story which binds people, it's the story which make them want to mobilize to defend a culture.
Thank you very much. You wouldn't believe it. Of course.
Since it took me 20 years to come to Bled, I wanted to add something on Ivan's pessimism and optimism thinking. In Brussels, there is one thing that is called the intellectual appeal of pessimism. So normally if you are a pessimistic person, like Jean Quatremer and others, you get more invitations for parties, for interviews, you look more interesting. But if you look macroscopically on the way European integration developed from the 50s to now, I think there is no shred of doubt that the optimists won the argument. The pessimists continuously failed. The disaster of World War II is the beginning of the project that brings together winners and losers. The stagnation of 30 years brings the law and the single market. The mad cow disease and the dioxin crisis in the 90s bring the best ever food safety framework in the world. The financial crisis and the euro crisis bring economic governance and banking supervision and the ESM and the FSF. The pandemic brings the vaccines and the recovery fund. Ukraine brings taxpayers' money to buy weapons for a third country, and Ukraine also brings this collective awareness about defense. So look at everything that happened since, and you may mistrust in equal terms pessimists from optimists because they want to speak about the future. But if you take these 70 years of integration, slice it, analyze it, and zoom out, sorry to say, the optimists won. The optimists won. And I still have reasons, good reasons to believe that despite our many misadventures currently and problems, probably this is a blessing in disguise. You know, probably all this would win the day for yet another match for the optimistic team. In a way, it's already happening. And something is more important, it transcends national politics. Many of these advances happened whilst national politics did not have the fuel to sustain them, but still happened. So there you go. People who know me know that I'm an incurable optimist, and since nobody wants to seem to go to bed, I thought to add this final.
Can I suggest a footnote? It's very well known, by the way, on the market that if you're a pessimist, you're never going to make a big money. So better be an optimist. So probably the optimists are better to win, but pessimists are better to survive.
You wouldn't believe it, but we are literally in the film format of 90 minutes, so it's the right moment to read something that I was given by the organizers, that the moderator should give the first question to the young Bled Strategic Forum fellows in the room by asking the following question. Are there any young Bled Strategic Forum fellows in the room willing to pose the first question to the speakers? Please, raise your hand. Super. So, it's not written here. Are there any senior fellows in the room? I'm joking. Please, Grk, the Greek.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this panel. Basically, this is my panel. Basically, this is my panel. Because I met Margaritis in Brussels, and we talked how it was when he was in Washington talking to Trump. And he has a lot of stories. So when this panel ends, just ask him. It's quite interesting. With the Minister of Culture, I'm living in Tabor, so she knows. I'm a Tabor guy. And with Stojan, we worked very much together also when he was a Minister of, Chief of Cabinet of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And Géraldine, actually, she was the reason that we set up this panel, because her latest book is about European identity. And Ivan, I don't have to introduce Ivan because, everybody knows him. It was a great debate. One question that came up to my mind is, what do you all think is the turning point in order to make the story of European identity believable for young people, because the young people are going to be the ones who are going to carry this story forward. I mean, for me, and this is just a challenge, right now it's probably Gaza and what is happening in Palestine and what is happening right now in the Middle East. Because if you want to build up European identity, European story, you need a unified voice. And if you don't have a unified voice about the major problems that we are facing right now in the world, it's very hard to actually convince the young people to follow one voice, one story, which is European. So, you know, my question is for all the panelists, what is this point where we can make the European story tangible also for the people who are going to come after us, meaning the young people?
Let's start the same list as you mentioned. So maybe Margaritis first.
Yeah, for me, the critical issue would be fear. I think what would compel young Europeans to sort of become more aware about Europe and discover this sense of communality is if there is a sense of fear that they will lose out many of the things that they now consider given. Young Europeans think that Europe has always been like this. Free Ryanair tickets, cheap tickets, Erasmus, open borders, you come, you go, you fall in love, nothing bothers me, you know. They miss the historic experiences of us. I was body searched at Thessaloniki airport the first time I went out of Greece because they wanted customs officers to see if I would bring more than the permitted dollars limit out of the country. So if young Europeans all of a sudden sense that these things are in danger, then they will become, at least in my mind, more aware of Europe. Gaza can be part of that. Ukraine can also be part of that. A major crisis that would affect the Baltics or our external border could be a part of that. Hybrid attacks could be a part of that. The Russians shooting down the Ursula plane over Sofia could be something like that. But this is that would be a compelling moment, something that would shake them out of their comfort zone.
That's the turning point.
Yeah, I agree that Gaza is one of the turning point, but not only for European Union, but for the whole humanity, because what is happening, we are seeing the televised genocide in front of us every day, and every human should feel that this is wrong and should act or should have a government that acts. And I think that not being hypocritical sometimes, I think this is also the turning point, to see that European Union is true, it's sincere, and it is not only what you gain from the capital, from the war, from the war industry, or every sort of other economic whatever deals that we are having with whatever countries, or that the countries are being treated differently, for example, Israel or Russia, and not being true to our own values that we have as Europeans and as European Unions. This is very much important. So, of course, Gaza, but yes, for everybody, and not. But the second thing, I think that it is also time for a New Deal, but also a sincere New Deal on the green politics, because this is also a sphere of hypocriticism and of everything that is giving money on one hand, but of course using private jets and going to Switzerland and so on the other hand. And we as politicians are also part of that. So to be also an example, but not only a personal example, I'm talking on policies, on states, on European values, because nobody will believe us or our policies if we will not live by them. And of course, being a young person, I think they are very much afraid, but because they will not see trees in 20 years, or their children, or my child, or my grandchild will not see water, hear birds singing, and so on. And we have the anxiety of climate change, but of course not with the older population, not with most of the leaders. And I think this sincerity of dealing with climate change would also help to build this our European community identity, whatever we call it, but something that would also help to convince other parts of the world that this is important, as we did with democracy.
Thank you. Géraldine, the turning point.
Turning point. Well, first, Gaza is not Ukraine. There is no Hamas in Ukraine. So this is, I think, quite important to remember. Well, I think we shouldn't be too strict with the youth. Because maybe the reason why they are a bit indifferent to Europe and to politics is because they grew up in a world which we contributed to build. And we were not vigilant enough, especially towards the use of smartphone. And we all use smartphone, and we want the kids not to use them. And we all use Amazon and Uber, and so there is an accumulation of compromission we are responsible for, and they are paying for. So I think our responsibility is to create the conditions so that they might be reinterested in politics in Europe.
Thank you. Ivan, the turning point.
Sorry, don't forget, it's a quite divided generation. And we try to see part of it. They're very much divided, by the way, on the gender line. Never in history, when we have basically the data, there was a generation in which the young men and the young women go politically in a different direction. Normally, the major difference is between generations. So you have a certain type of a coherence on the level of the generation, and this was particularly true, of course, 68 and the baby boomers, and it was a very big generation. Now you're going to see, and this is different in different parts of Europe, but for example, go to Poland. I'm just going to give you one figure of the last Polish elections. Voters who are older than 60, on the first round of the presidential elections, 90% of them voted either for the candidate of Tusk or for the candidate of Kaczynski. The major polarization between kind of which structured Polish politics. When you go to people who are younger than 28, 70% of them voted for other candidates. Neither for the candidates of Tusk, nor for the candidate of Kaczynski. And most of them have been either radical left, radical right. Men much more moving to the right, women much more on the left. So I'm saying this because the first is really to realize that this generation is very much about there. Secondly, it's interesting to understand why Gaza for the Europeans. And listen, it's interesting. Because normally you should believe that Russia, Ukraine, being closer, many of the things go there. But there was something about hypocrisy, I very much agree with this. But also what in my view is starting, and this is going to become the problem of the European Union. There is an impotence of Europe about everything that goes to hard policy. Listen, you're not going to inspire young people with being impotent. Could be, but So from this point of view, there is something about this kind of a Europe always saying, not always, but most of the time, the right words and nothing happens. And this is happening in a moment in which the politics is changing. In my view, the politics these days is like this truth or dare game, where it's not simply about delivery, but you should basically either kind of go very confessional in order to put the people, or do something very daring, and so on and so on. And this kind of an interesting story, because if you see where's come the attraction, there was a major move also of the young voters towards Trump on the last American elections. And part of it is something that was very typical for the left in the 20th century, the primacy of politics. Just daring to do things that you believe cannot be done politically. You can dislike the thing, but you are not going to ignore basically the political will to move things, to say, I'm taking responsibility, I can do it. I'm saying this because for Europe it's difficult. It's a difficult mechanism. In a certain way, Europe is a mechanism which works perfectly to prevent doing stupid things. But European Union is not a great player for this truth or dare game. And this is institutional. It's not about political leaders simply and so on. And how to do this is going to be a real issue. And as I said, the fact that they're a small cohort, the fact that their votes are not so important. For example, in a place like Bulgaria, you can win the elections totally ignoring the youngest voters. You don't need them in order to basically win the elections. So this is something that, in my view, is going to be really, really dramatic. And probably they're going to speak for themselves. This is the other story. My last point is there is something interesting about this generation, particularly the progressive part of it. They slightly decide to behave also like a last generation because they never put things in context. I was following this very much in the American debate. Listen, having slaves is very bad. But having slaves in the 17th century and having slaves in the 20th century is probably not the same. So there are certain type of historical realities that have been changing. And if we go now, probably there are going to be a day when eating meat is going to be perceived by the next generation as bad as having slaves. But this kind of the idea that you do not want to put choices in historical context is interesting. Because this is, according to the religious studies, the definition of apocalypse, when all dead and alive are together, and they're judged by the same judge. And I'm afraid of this. We started with the fact that I'm afraid of this apocalyptic vibe, which you see for different reasons, absolutely genuine concern, and they're legitimate about what's happening with climate. Other things, but this is the story of this is a generation that have the feeling that slightly they behave like the last generation.
Thank you, Ivan. I have two small requests because we were speaking a lot about the books and we were quite good in guessing how many survivors will be at midnight. There are 50 books, program books at the door, so of European Capital of Culture 2025. Take it. They're in Slovene, Italian, and English. And you will see what you missed, but also what you can still visit by the end of the year. And the second is, please help me in applause to this great, great panelists because it was good. Thank you very much. Pardon? Ça c'est pour vous, ça c'est pour vous, ça c'est pour vous et les autres ça va. Voilà. Ok, voilà.